Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel and my project, where I try to reinvent the wheel of computing, but this time make the wheel round and with ball bearings. So today I want to talk about something that, for whatever reasons, it has become a bit of a taboo. It has become a no-no in the world of programming. But something that I enjoy very, very much and that I wish more people would adopt. It's not something new, it's quite old, but has, let's say, been deprecated by 99% of programmers. Again, because in their opinion, this is a bad idea. So when it comes to naming variables, we all know that naming variables can be a difficult task due to all sorts of reasons. We don't want to make them too short because then they are very cryptic and other people will not understand exactly what that variable is or what's her purpose. We also might forget over time. We don't want to make variables too long either, because then they become the whole source code becomes difficult to follow, and yeah, that's not a good idea. So when naming variables, we need to be somewhere in the middle. However, to make matters worse, what I find extremely important, even when I read my own source code, is to be able to just take a look at a variable, no matter where she is in the source code, and just figure as fast as possible what type of variable that is. Because the type of variable tells us many things about that variable's purpose and that variable's meaning in that particular place. This is even more important and is true even more important to a higher degree in programming languages that are not strongly typed, such as JavaScript, PHP. I think Perl. I haven't done a lot of Perl programming, but Perl, from what I've seen, is similar. It's not like C, C++, where you have to explicitly declare a variable having a certain type. You can change the types and so on and so forth. In those languages, it is even more important to choose what type of each variables are, and to stick with them, and to make sure that you never ever change the type of that particular variable, no matter where she is. Okay, so the style that I have adopted many years ago, pretty much at the very beginning of my programming journey, even though it's not a style that I have been taught by anyone, it's just a style that I have figured on my own, is what is called a systems Hungarian notation. Okay, I'm not gonna get into the deep dive informations about why this is called Hungarian, because there was a half American, half Hungarian guy that used to work for Microsoft, and he used that a lot, and then it became this notation became very popular. I'm not gonna go into why it's called systems. There are two types of Hungarian notations. One is called application Hungarian and one is called systems Hungarian. If you want to know more about this, you can basically go on Wikipedia and search Hungarian notation, and you will find this article and more informations about this. So it's not about I don't really care about the story, the history of this particular naming style. What I care to explain very well, and to also give you examples, is to why this is really important if you care about the speed at which you understand a certain source code. And in this video, I'm going to explain how I use this particular notation called System Hungarian. Then I will give you a clear example by showing one of my most complex source codes. And then towards the end, because it will take a long time and maybe you will just be bored and you will want to skip at some point, we will take a look at a project that I have to deal with from time to time, an online shop that is made in CakePHP. Not because I chose so, because I just inherited this project. This project was created originally years ago by someone else, and it's just crap. I'm not strictly talking about the work that these guys have done, let's say my former colleagues. I'm talking strictly about the CakePHP platform, the CakePHP framework that anyone would need to deal with if they would choose to create a project in CakePHP. And we're going to like this is going to be a very good example. You're going to see why, because not knowing what type of variables we have there, it's gonna make it a lot more difficult for us to understand that source code. Honestly, I don't even know. I haven't done this before. This is going to be something that I will do basically live right now while recording this video. So I do not know how much of that source code I will understand. So in a way, it's gonna be interesting. Okay, so that being said, let's start with the first part. So what is the basic concept of system Hungarian notation? Well, the basic concept is that if you have a variable, okay, you don't type a variable name like this. You have to encode in the variable name somehow. It doesn't really matter how, although it is easier to just put a prefix. It is important that we encode what type of variable we want that to be, okay? Because that type is important, and even in programming languages where you can change a type of a variable, you can have like PHP, like let's say you have a variable equals some string, and now that variable is a string. And then you have some more source code, and at some point you do something stupid like variable equals 14, and now that variable is an integer. Well, first of all, you should absolutely never ever do this, and ideally, if you deal with source code written by someone else, preferably this shouldn't happen as well due to them writing that source code that way. A variable should always have a certain type. Okay, so let's see, a variable should always be one certain type, or at the very worst case scenario, she should be null if she doesn't actually have a value. Okay, let's say some variable equals some function. Okay, so we want to call a function, that function returns a value, we store that value in the variable. Now that variable, we want to know that that variable has a single type, or null if that function has failed. Okay, I'm not gonna go into the discussion of why exceptions are garbage. They do come with a particular advantage, and they are nice for, you know, having a nice stack trace, but other than that, exceptions are garbage, and we should rely mostly, if not entirely, on errors, because, you know, if you know that some function can potentially have problems and return null, then it becomes clear that it is our responsibility to do something like, if some variable equals null or something like that, then do something for error, or we could else do the rest. Or we could have the opposite approach. If some variable is not null, then, you know, we do something meaningful, else handle the error. Okay. So null is the only exception to the rule of a variable having a certain type. Other than that, a variable should a variable's type should never ever be changed during runtime. So here's how I name my variables. Aside from very short variables that I might want to have in various cases, such as I, J, K, X, Y, Z. Okay, and yes, this is how I pronounce these letters because I'm not a native English speaker. You will just have to get a little bit used to, you know, hearing someone else speak slightly different English. Aside from these, you know, like when you say for in C, C++, let's say for integer E equals 0, E less than, I don't know, something, E++, well, obviously, one letter variables are perfect and are ideal here. We don't want to write something more complicated than that unless it explicitly makes sense. But aside from these short name variables, when I have to do something, when I have to name a variable, I always put 1, 2, or 3 letters first, and then the name of that particular variable. Okay, such as n fruits for integer. This is my personal choice. Other people might put an e here, e fruits. I chose n. Some others might want to make the difference between signed and unsigned. Maybe if I was writing C++ code, I would as well, but I mostly write code in other languages where unsigned is not really a thing. Even in C++, I would not care so much of knowing if that thing is signed or unsigned, because that's a bit of a detail that is important just for a particular portion of the source code and not so much at large. That's just a very small detail whether an integer is signed or unsigned, and it's not anywhere near as important as the fact that that variable is an integer. Okay. F fruits if it's a float, D fruits if that variable is a double, or languages where double is a thing, C, C++. Okay, I don't use this in PHP because in PHP you don't really have the distinction between floats and doubles, or JavaScript or stuff like that. Okay, if I have a string, I put the variable I name, fruits. Fruits. It's a string. Fun fact: in the past, I used to use PHP fruits also for string. In case you are wondering why, well, because in C, C++, if you wanted to make a very simple string, an ASCII string, you would create a char star something, and that would be a pointer char. Therefore, you know, PC back then used to mean for me pointer char. I do not use this notation anymore because it doesn't really make all that much sense. So nowadays I do my best to stick with fruits for str for strings. Okay, if I have an array, then I would put array fruits. What else? If I truly, in rare cases, if I truly have something that could legitimately have different types at runtime, and of course I will then have to check what types, but in order for me to know that that variable is legitimately potentially having different types, I will use mx. Okay, and this tells me, hey, it's a mixed type variable. This is particularly useful in PHP, but probably in other languages as well. But again, this is to be used at a very minimum situations, only in extremely rare cases. But in those cases, you know, I do want to distinguish between a regular variable that has a particular type versus a variable that can potentially have a multitude of types. By the way, besides string, you might also have a single character. When I know for a fact, even though in scripting languages, PHP, JavaScript, and so on, strings are not really a thing. Characters are not really a thing. A character is simply a string of length 1 with just one character. But if I know that I only care about one character in a string, and for me that's not a string, for me that's a character, then I will use letter C or C, the way you call that in English. So that might be something like C fruit. This would be a character. Okay. What else? Oh, boolean, true or false. B, fruits. Okay, this would be boolean. Yeah, sure, but maybe some of you would pronounce that boolean. I pronounce it boolean with two O's. And last but not least, let's say that we have an object of a certain class. I personally use K for class, K fruits. Why? Because letter K, or kappa as we call her, is basically from a functional point of view is the same as C. So K has the same role as C. So whether you say class like this, whether you say class like this, which if I'm not mistaken is the German word for class, it's the same thing. So I use this letter for objects. But of course it would maybe for other people make a lot more sense to say O fruits for this particular variable, because after all this is an object, so O would make more sense. I'm absolutely perfect. You know, I would be able to read and understand either of these, and if I wouldn't be so accustomed by now for using the kappa letter, I would most likely use O as well. And this is pretty much it. This is these are the types of variables that we might have, right? And the prefix that would make sense, at least according to me. But of course, each of us would be able to have different prefixes for different types. The reason why this is really important, because it makes things really easy to understand what is it that we're talking about. Before I go on, let me address a simple thing that most people who speak against this style of naming variables, they mention the fact that, oh, it's really difficult to read, like it's really hard to separate these two or three letters, or one, two, or three letters in front, and then we have an uppercase letter in. I call that bullshit. And the reason why I call this bullshit is because, as with many things in life, this is the kind of thing that takes a little bit of getting used to. But once you get used to, it stops being a problem. On top of that, it wouldn't be difficult nowadays to have an IDE as smart enough so that the syntax coloring will put a slightly different nuance of color on the first on the prefix letters, and color the rest of the variable name with a slightly different other color, so that you can visualize this better. For some reason, IDEs don't come with this option. You cannot just activate such an option, even though it would be very useful. But it wouldn't be impossible. So the idea that, oh, this is so hard to see, no, this idea is bullshit. It's just a matter of getting used to doing things this way. Okay. So let me quickly show you why this is a very bad problem before we get into examples. Why not this notation, but why it is such a big problem to not use a notation like this. Okay, so going on with the fruits thing, with the fruits example that I've used earlier. Okay, you see something like this inside your source code with no notation whatsoever, no convention made, no nothing. Okay, can you tell me anything about this variable? Well, no, you can't. You have no idea what types of variable this is. And this is important, okay? Because if fruit is, let's say, 5, okay, well, this is an integer. This is probably the number of kilograms of fruits in somewhere in a particular basket or whatever. Or it could be maybe not so much the number of kilograms, because we might want a fractional number, but it could be the actual number of fruits in a particular bowl or basket or plate or something. Okay, we have 5 fruits somewhere. Okay, so in this case fruits is an integer, but again, we don't know that for sure. And in order for us to see, we need to just waste quite a bit of time trying to hunt all the places where this variable is given a value until we actually get to see what that value is. Okay, fruits could also be 3.6. okay, so in this case it would be a float and could potentially mean the number of kilograms somewhere, the actual quantity in kilograms, which would make a lot more sense, since, you know, a floating point would be used for this thing. Fruits could also be equal to true, in which case, okay, this is a Boolean. This tells us if the variable is true or false, most likely because that variable has acquired her value from, let's say, a function where we are checking if something is a fruit or not. So, okay, but again, we don't know that. We don't know if fruits is Boolean, is an integer, is a floating point. Fruits could also be, you know, a string. I don't know, apples, bananas, grapes. Okay, it could be a comma delimited string, it could be a space delimited string, it could be anything. Or it could be an array. So I'm not gonna write more. You understand what I'm saying, okay? It could be an object, and if fruits is an object, then okay, we know for a fact that we could do something like this: call a function. If fruits is not an object of a class, then we cannot do this. Okay, if fruits is an array, then we know that we could do something like this: fruits of 0, meaning access the very first element in the array that is fruits. If fruits is not an array, then we cannot do this, and we get in trouble if we do this. Okay, if fruit is a structured array, then we could potentially say something like for each fruits of, I don't know, let's say tropical, and so on and so forth. Well, this is not valid, but you understand what I'm saying. You want to loop through all the fruits that are under the tropical key, because you know that fruits is an array, and that it's a structured array. Inside of fruits you have other sub arrays, and you are grouping fruits together based on something like, by simply saying fruits just like that, you don't know what that variable is. However, if you write something like RR fruits, like I've mentioned earlier, okay, this is an array. Now I know what I can do. Okay, now I know that I can do something like this. Okay, I can access the first or the nth position in an array. Or if I determine that my array is structured, I can do this. However, I can absolutely not do this. Okay? Not ever. Also, because I know that array is array fruits is an array, I absolutely know that I should not be doing something like array fruits equals some integer function, a function that calls an integer, that returns an integer, or a character, or a string, or a class, an object of a class, or whatever. No, absolutely not, because then I will be changing the type of the variable. And even if I wouldn't use this notation and I wouldn't create confusion, even if I would have something like this, it would still be bad. Like I said, it would still be bad to change the type of a variable, because you then will give yourself the possibility to not just shoot yourself in the foot, but also in the brain. Shoot yourself in the mouth, in the head, metaphorically speaking, in your entire source code. Okay, so this is why systems Hungarian notation, or any other notation where you can derive the type of a variable from the name of a variable very easily, is highly useful. Okay, even if you don't prefer this kind of notation like this, maybe you would prefer something like this, with a prefix, then underline, and then the name of a variable. It's still fine. Anyone could still understand what you're talking about. Anyone could still understand that you are having a variable of this type or that type. On top of that, by prefixing a variable, you could easily have multiple variables with the same core name but with different prefixes that are grouped together. For example, let's say that you don't want to call let's go on with this notation in continuation. Okay, let's say that for performance reasons you don't want to keep on calling the count function to actually count how many items do you have in an array of fruits. You want to be able to just store that variable in a store that number in a variable and keep on using that. And you want to have this variable be connected to the actual array. Well, in this case, you can easily have arr underline fruits or arr fruits as the array containing the content, and n fruits as the variable containing the number of fruits in that array. Okay, because they don't conflict with each other. Okay, when you do not use these kinds of notations, you are forced to use different notations that most likely are a bit more confusing. Like, you have to name this variable, I don't know, num fruits, or number of fruits, or fruits underline number, or something like that. Okay, it would, in this particular case, it wouldn't be all that bad. It would still be relatively clear. But again, number could be integer, but after all, it could be also a floating point. What if what if you have 5 let's you know, let's say that fruits is not an array anymore, it's something else. What if you have 5 initially you have 5 fruits on a table, then somebody comes with a knife and cuts one of those fruits into half, so now you have 4.5. Okay, well, then fruits number is no longer an integer, it's a floating point. But again, there's no way you know if this variable is an integer or a floating point. You just can't. Whereas if you use systems Hungarian notation, you will know. And you will know for sure what to expect from a variable. You will know for sure if you change the value of that variable, what kind of value should be, and not to change the type, and so on and so forth. Okay, this is a huge advantage. Now, moving on, let me show you an example from my own source code. And we're not gonna dive super deep, but I'm going to show you how valuable it is to have something like this. Let's say you need to, let's say you have playlist software that creates a playlist for a TV channel, and you have to understand something in that source code. Okay, I'm gonna remove this guy's head. this guy is an AI image generated anyway. So this is a portion of that software, and I'm going to get deeper into the source code up to a certain point, just to explain to you how this works in practice and how easy it is to understand what is going on. Okay, so I have two classes, cPlaylist export, because the process of generating a playlist is one thing, and the process of taking that list and exporting her to an actual file format is a completely different thing. So I have chosen to separate them into two different classes. So for each process I have a different object. Okay, I have a CakePlaylist for the playlist and a CakeExport for the playlist export. We're not going to look at the export one, we're going to look at the playlist one. Okay, so here you can easily here you can clearly see that CakePlaylist is, you know, an object of a certain class. However, this is just because we are here at the declaration. But if we scroll a bit, and let's say that object is being instantiated, I don't know, 1000 lines before, or in a completely different file. Well, if you would have just playlist, you wouldn't know what that variable is. It wouldn't be all that difficult to see that, oh, playlist is an object, because then I have arrow and then a name of a function. So okay, but again, from this point on, things will become clearer, while Systems Hungarian is better. So here I'm so what am I doing with the playlist? Well, I am calling a function generate playlist. I am passing some parameters, because this function needs to know a little bit about the context in which it's generated, what organization has what TV channel, and for what particular day we want to generate that playlist. All of these, we can easily see that all of these variables, okay, are strings, because I have the PHP notation, pointer char. Again, even though this is PHP code, but back when I wrote this 12 years ago, I was still heavily influenced by C++ that I've done 20 years ago or so. But again, it's not such a big deal to, you know, to figure, oh, okay, these are strings. And what does this function returns? Oh, this function returns an array. Oh, nice. Okay, so now we know that at the end of the playlist generation, we actually get an array. What can we, because this the value that receives, the variable that receives the value of this function is called arr+. Plus short for playlist, arr short for array. Okay, so this is an array. Now I understand that I should expect that this array is essentially an array of all the elements in that particular playlist. How is that array structured? Well, that's a matter of debate. You know, it's not that clear, but of course, those are details that will, in no language and in no convention, we could possibly encode them. But knowing that this is an array is good enough. If we take a look down, we see, oh, I'm checking if the status is success by basically checking if array plus of status, so status is a key inside this array, is a string called success. Okay, so and down I see array playlist of data. So okay, so inside the array playlist I have a key, sort of like metadata keys that tell me something about the process of generating that playlist, and the data is stored somewhere else in another key. Okay, so let's get into this function generate playlist, which is from the class playlist. Okay, I will tell you this is in this particular class. And here's another bit of a thing that a lot of people hate and avoid at all cost, but I personally don't find it a problem at all, which is have a lot in a single file. So this class playlist starts in this file on line 36 and ends on line 4453. So I have a single class that is longer than 4400 lines. Absolutely no problem whatsoever. Why would there be a problem for a file to contain so many lines if for a class to contain so many lines if that class is structured in a nice way? Well, it wouldn't be a problem. On top of that, any self-respecting IDE should be able to give you an outline or essentially a list of all the functions and variables inside that class. So you could easily jump from one function to another. Okay, so what we want to take a look at is the function generate playlist inside of here. So let's see, AFG generate playlist. Okay, so generate playlist with the three parameters mentioned earlier, and for the sake of clarity, I've used the same names both in the definition of the function as well in the function call. Why not? And again, what do we see? Well, we have some global variables. These do not follow the system's Hungarian notation. However, because they are written in uppercase, it should tell us, hey, these are really important things. These are not your average global variables. These are most likely objects, and in this case they are objects, but I'm talking from the perspective of a person that does not exactly know what is in this source code and just tries to perform educated guesses. Okay, so these global variables log and database must be some objects of some classes that allow us to create entries in a log and to work with the database, which exactly it's what it happens to be. Okay, then we see a function called to a reset function, no parameters, and we don't care about the return, most likely because she's not doing anything. She's not doing anything that requires us to use afterwards, right? Then we see another call to function load planning inside this class that returns a string. Again, PHP pointer char, that's a string. Okay, so we know what this function does. Load planning, the name is self-suggesting. The fact that this returns a string tells us that either the string is important or is a status. And if we check a little bit downwards, we see if this string is not success, then we return. So we basically abort everything and we return an error. Oh, okay, so this function load planning returns just a status. Whatever she's doing is not important from the perspective of the return value, other than to know if this was a success or not. Of course, a success or an error could be encoded as an integer, but anyway, we're not gonna go into the debate of why sometimes we might want, especially in scripting languages, we might just want to return a string, because if that's an error, we could just display that string on the screen or whatever. Okay, moving on, we see another function that takes the same parameters to understand what context we are in, what organization, what TV channel, what date we want, and also return some a string. This string is much later sent to another function. Okay, what else do we have here? Oh, we have a database call. We have database arrow run quick select, and we see something that sort of kind of resembles SQL, but is not SQL. This is because database is an object of a class that attempts to make an abstraction. So performs a whole bunch of things for us, and the function is run quick select. Okay, so it stands to reason for someone to assume that this is a select query in an SQL database, and the return is an array, okay, because the return value is stored in arr settings, therefore this must be an array, okay. Of course, if this function fails, this variable could be null or something else, so we still have to check if this is an array and is not empty. You know, then we might want to do something. If this is not an array or this is empty, then we might want to do something else. But anyway, that's a completely different problem. Here we need an object of another class. So we have K advertising, K from class. Again, this is my notation to say this is an object. From now on, this will be treated as an object, meaning we can call a function, right? Again, with this advertising object, we can call, and we do call, a function get commercials playlist. You know, we are passing a key from this particular array that has been created by one of the previous functions, and this get commercials playlist function returns in turn another array, which we store here inside of this class in arr commercials. From now on, we know that arr commercials contain an array, most likely of commercials, because, you know, that's what the name implies, and that's what the type implies. And a whole bunch of other functions. Let's see, where do we want to jump? Because this main function is mostly just for calling a whole bunch of other functions to do a whole bunch of you know, useful things. I don't know, rewrite instructions, execute instructions. Let's try it with execute. Execute instructions, okay. This end playlist cursor, okay, what does it tell us? Well, it's an integer. Yeah, sure, it's a playlist cursor, but it's an integer, because this could be an array with multiple keys that have multiple purposes. But no, this is an integer, and we know this for sure. We don't have to jump. We are at line 2600, okay. We don't have to jump all the way here to see that, oh, this is an integer. Well, we wouldn't actually know unless the programmer who wrote this wrote in some comments. We wouldn't actually know. But anyway, because of this naming, we know this for a fact. Now let me jump back. Okay, so again, we have an array context because we have arr in front. This is important because here we can easily see that this is an array, because we have you know, array context equals array of this thing, okay. But once we scroll down, if we would not have the array word type embedded in the name of the function, this might be a bit tricky to figure, okay. What else? Yeah, I think this is yet another good example. For example, string position. Okay, sure, we know that string position in PHP returns an integer. However, if we would write the variable name stop, later we might not know what stop means. Stop could be a character representing the final character in a string. Stop could be an entire string. Stop could be a whole number of things other than an integer representing the index inside a string, you know, where a certain character was found. In this case, the percent character. But because the variable is called nStop, well, we know for a fact that this is an integer, and we know for a fact that we can rely on this. Okay. Before that, we also have a string position of something else stored in another variable and start. And as you can see here, we actually check if this is an integer. Why? Because string position can potentially return false if a certain substring is not found at all inside the original string. That's perfectly fine. So nStart in that case will be a boolean. You might say, well, okay, but that doesn't this breaks our notation? No, our convention. No, this doesn't break. Why? Because that particular case when nStart would be a boolean false, that would be an exception case. Not exception instead of in the sense of, you know, how exceptions are in languages. I'm talking about the common word exception. That would be a case that would not be normal, would need to be handled separately. And this is why we need to still have some awareness and to perform some checks. But if those checks clear and prove to be true, then we know for a fact that this variable is an integer without knowing, without coming here to this line just to check, hey, is nStart an integer or something else? Or is it, is start an integer if you wouldn't have this convention, or is start a boolean representing, you know, whether or not we have started something, because start could easily be a boolean true or false thing. But no, in this case, if nStart is a boolean, considering we are expecting an integer, then we know for a fact that this is an error, this is a problem. We need to treat this somehow in a different way. Hence why we have this if is integer, and if it's not an integer, then we do something else. Okay. So, yeah. I think by now you have understood, why this kind of notation is absolutely useful. Okay, this PHP automation type. Okay, this is clearly a string, so I'm going to treat this like a string. Okay, so if I put this in a switch, then I have to search the predefined values, which are a string, so I have to enclose them in quotation marks or something like that, right? Time, for example, here I have time code to seconds. If you would not know what this function does or returns, you might be tempted to say, oh, returns the number of seconds from this time code, which is true, but returns the number of seconds as an integer. Well, as it so happens, no, it's as a floating point, because in this particular software, time can have fractional values. You can find yourself in the middle of a second somewhere. So because this returns a floating point, I am storing the value of these two function calls in f playlist start and f playlist stop. And the front f tells me, oh, that's a floating point. Okay, well, now I know. Now I know that I have to deal with this in a different way. Okay, and so on and so forth. Okay, I think I've explained enough of my personal source code. Now we're going to 48 minutes in the video. Okay, we're going to get into the source code of something called CakePHP, which is a PHP framework for creating, well, any web applications, still maintained according to Wikipedia. The last stable release 5.3 was released just 14 days ago on 9 January, so it's still actively maintained. They boast that, wow, you can build quickly, no configuration, the things you need are built in, which, okay, technically speaking, they're not wrong. Clean MVC conventions, blah 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 blah. However, as you will come to understand, yeah, they are quite what they created, at least the version that I have, but which is most likely an older version, but I have no reasons to believe that they have simplified the newer versions. Well, they wrote a source code that is a very big pain in the ass. So at some point I had to deal with this particular memory problem, this error. When somebody was searching something very short on this online shop, he would get a 500 internal server error, and this was the log that was created. It took me a while. I eventually searched this particular error on Google, and I discovered, well, actually, it's not a problem. It's not strictly a problem of PHP or the PHP framework CakePHP. It's actually a configuration problem. The PDO method of accessing databases requires certain buffers, and those buffers were too small. I increased them and I solved the problem, so it wasn't, technically speaking, a programming problem, but I'm going to take this as if this is a programming problem to explain to you how horrible this kind of source code is. Okay, so I realized that we are at 15 minutes 50 minutes inside the video. It's going to be a very long video, but sadly this is how most programming videos get to be. It's not strictly my fault. I do recognize that I'm speaking a bit slower than other people. Feel free to just turn on the speed of the YouTube video player at 1.5, maybe even 2 times the speed. Anyway, let's get in. As we can see, we have a request URL /căutare !Q egal PLA. Căutare means search in Romanian, in my language. PLA is basically 3 letters. There are a whole bunch of products in this online shop that have codes starting with PLA, and you can it would make sense to search only these 3 letters in order to have a list of all products. Because the list was pretty long, I run into this problem. Anyway, moving on. So what we see is that we have a 36 line call stack, which from the very beginning it should tell us, hey, this framework is not really all that good. I mean, really, you actually need 36 just to when you type something in a search box and you hit enter, you hit the search button, you actually need 35 functions being called, right? Because the 36th one is the main. Yeah, this doesn't look good. So what do we see first? Well, in webroot index.php we have cake HTTP server arrow run. So this is the first function being called. The first thing that we can tell is that we have a bit of an ambiguous situation. Why do we have a class named server, HTTP server? Like, this is a very weird architecture, but anyway. So let's go into this webroot index.php, and at line 107 is basically the last line of the source code. I don't know. I hope that the font size is good enough. I'm constantly scrolling, zooming in. I hope that this is big enough in order to see what's going on here on your screen. So we have, what do we have on this line? Well, we have an object, $server. We know that it's an object because we have an arrow calling a function emit and passing as parameter a value returned from another function inside this server, from the function run. Okay. So now let's I'm gonna write step by step, how am I investigating this. Okay, so I have this server emit. and I'm going to write what I this is probably gonna go upwards to 2 hours video, just so you know. So let's make this PHP, and let's put syntax highlighting. Script PHP. Okay, so we have some colors here at least. Okay, so what do we have? We have a server, which is an object of class server. We see that we instantiate this with an object of another class application. Okay, so now we need to figure what application is. This application, when we're creating an object of application, we pass a path towards the /config folder. Why is this really necessary? I don't really understand, because fun fact, 12 years ago I wrote my own web framework, very lightweight, not made public, but anyway, that's besides the point. I know for a fact that in a PHP application, the application herself can figure where she is on the server, what was the request done, what website she responds for, you know. So the application, a PHP application, is given enough information by the server to figure on her own where she is located, who she is as an application. So you don't explicitly need to give an application any kind of informations, unless you want to create an application with completely different details. But then I don't know, it's kind of weird. Anyway, so I'm going to say that I'm going to skip over. Normally I would have to go to this class application and see what does this application do. For the sake of sanity, right now I'm going to skip over. Let's say I don't care. What I care is the fact that server, and I'm going to write without the dollar. Server is an object of class server. I'm going to write some pseudocode from now on for the sake of simplicity. Okay. And server emit, server run. Okay, so now I have to go into server run and I have to check this in order to see what's the returned value and figure then what does emit do. So where is, so in CakePHP server, well, that's most likely, well, I know for a fact because I've searched a little bit earlier, it's in the folder called vendor CakePHP circle. Actually, we can take a look at the next line in our stack trace, CakePHP circle HTTP server. And server here. Okay, so this is the function, this is the file. So what do I need to what do I need to check? Actually, let me, I don't want to, yeah, so I'm going to put this here because I don't want to keep having to switch between Kate and IDE. Okay, so we need to look at the run function. Okay, so let's see, do we have an outline? Oh, outline doesn't work. Why? Oh, because kdevelop, which is the KDE IDE, the last version, because I keep everything up to date, does not really understand what the hell is going on here. Use even dispatcher trait, even manager as private underline even manager, get as private underline get, blah blah blah. Okay. Okay. So I scroll down and it's not so hard to find this function. So my goal is to see what this function returns, because again, whatever the function returns need to be passed as a parameter to the emit function, which is in the same file, and yeah, and what type this is. So this bootstrap, okay, I'm going to ignore this because the return value, if any, is not used. So okay, whatever. Response equals response or a new response. So okay. Let's see what is the return value. Return value is $response, which is set by this runner run. Oh wow. And this runner run is given middleware request response. All of these are variables that I have no fucking clue what they are. So middleware, where is middleware? This app middleware, okay. This app middleware is a function inside an object called app inside of this class. We don't know what type app is. We don't know. We don't really know the return type of middleware. Here this is checked. App has an instance of this thing, but what does exactly that mean? Okay, if middleware is not an instance of middleware queue, here an error, an exception is thrown. So okay, I'm going to assume that from now on middleware is of type middleware queue, because otherwise, you know, this entire application would crash here. So I am inside run middleware is middleware queue. Most likely doesn't help me, because again, classes are only useful if they encapsulate data that you care about. Classes are not really all that useful if they themselves are just abstractions over nothing, you know. So anyhow, let's move on. Middleware app, this app. What? So we obtain middleware by calling the middleware function of the app object. And if middleware is a valid object, now we need to add this app back into him, because object is masculine. So what? Why? Okay. Let's see. Request is server request factory, 4 points from globals. Oh, nice. Okay, I'm gonna skip over this. Response is either I forgot to look up. Both request and response come as parameters from when the function run is called, but they can be null. And here, if they are not null, basically this creates different objects for of these particular classes, because we need to have objects no matter what. Okay, so response either comes from the input, but for us the input is nothing, so initially at least both of these are null. So a new response is created here, a new server request something is created with this factory. Why do we need factory? Like, why do we need server request? Wait. Server request factory is this other class. Two different classes, like from globals. This one, okay. So server query body cookies files. I'm going to take a wild guess that, yeah, server is basically a sort of wrapper over the dollar server, super globals, and query query is get. Well, what if you have post? Oh, body is post. Wow. Why not just keep the get and post names for the sake of sanity? Like, anyhow, static normalized server. Why do we need to normalize a server? Like, what? Anyhow, so server, what is server here? Well, server is an array because in this version of PHP we can we actually, you know that server is an array. So that's at least that, and it's close enough to the definition. But anyway, request is new server request. Okay, wow. So server request factory basically generates a server request object, an object of server request class. Okay, and we have this this runner run. This runner run. Well, this runner, we don't know what this runner is. I mean, obviously it's an object, but we don't know of which class this is because it's not part of this particular function. This runner has been instantiated somewhere else. Okay, so now in order for us to see what this response is, which will eventually be returned by this run function, we need to dive into this runner run. We need to identify where this runner is created, and for this we need to, investigate the source code above. Great. Awesome. This was okay. I'm gonna skip for a moment because we are basically at the first function call, and it's just so HTTP server. Okay, let's investigate the server emit since we're here. Function bootstrap this app. Protected function bootstrap, which is called here in this run. Okay, what does this function do? This function calls another function of this app. Object, and then a small check and a function to why aren't these 3 lines, why couldn't these 3 lines be just placed over here? Since I'm going to take a wild guess that this bootstrap function is not called anywhere else in the entire source code. Like, why couldn't have this been like this and this function not existent? Because it's not really, useful. What does this function do, which we need to look at? Server emit. Okay, public function emit, responser interface. Okay, emitter interface. Wow. If not emitter, then creates basically a new response emitter, and regardless of whether that then calls the emit. Okay, so we need to take a look at this response emitter. And by the way, why the need for accolades? Like, this could have been written on a single line like this and would have been perfectly fine. Like yeah. So response emitter, and we need to take a look at the function emit. Clearly this function does not return anything because we don't have a return. The return value is not taken, and nothing is done with the return value. So it's safe to assume that the emit function spits out on the screen something, so just outputs whatever content directly outwards, right? This is also supported by the fact that server arrow emit does not care about the output because nothing happens here. Okay, so response emitter. Also, these classes have so many, each of them, they have so many dependencies that it's just absolutely ridiculous. Okay, class response emitter implements emitter interface. Wow, so nice. What we want, emitter emit response. Response interface max buffer length. Okay. Well, let's say that we wouldn't have needed necessarily system's Hungarian notation for this particular variable, because, you know, buffer length, it's pretty self-explanatory that it's going to be in the integer number of bytes. You cannot have fractional number of bytes, cannot have a character buffer length. So, okay, to a certain degree, this would make sense that you don't need to put n, but again, this is just a very small exception to the rule. Okay, so what do we have? We have file line, which is null. The very first thing that you know, I'm thinking of, okay, line can be a string. I'm assuming to be a string later in the source code. However, is file a string, or is file sort of like a handle that would get you know, opened by something like foo open? Is file gonna be an object of a certain class? I mean, file gets to be passed to header send function, which apparently this wants to be the string. But again, this could be something else. Yeah. So I don't know. At this point, I don't really want to go deeper, honestly, because it's the beginning of most, if not all, frameworks are so goddamn abstract, and they are trying to take every step and put that in a separate class, in a separate namespace that has like 5 to 10 dependencies, no matter how few things they do. You know, for example, here, let's take this $range equals this parse content range. Okay. Here's what CadeVelop says. This function, which I'm guessing is somewhere here in this class, returns an unsure type, whether array, whether boolean. Okay, so I'm gonna take a wild guess and say false on error and an array on success. But again, we will definitely not know later if range is an array or not. Now, it's true that this is towards the end of this function, so we will never have range anywhere else other than here. And here we are checking, hey, is this an array? Then do this. If not, then do that. But again, like, these functions are so goddamn small that it's so hard to understand such a source code, because you have to jump so much and you achieve so little in each of these functions that it's just it's just crazy stupid. Okay, let's do things backwards. Let's try to do things backwards. Let's go to the top of the stack and go down from there, because, you know, after all, our problems can be found mostly toward the top of the stack rather than the bottom. Okay, so what we have here in vendor CakePHP source database statement decorator. Wow, that's wow. What the fuck is a decorator, by the way? I don't know. I never used one because I don't need decorators. Like, I decorate my house, but not my source code. Oh. Statement decorator. Okay. And the error is at line 173. Put those statement execute. So 173. Wow. Yet another useless function. Public function execute, right? This is what, yeah, put those statement execute. This underline has executed equals true. By the way, why this disease with underline? Like, this is really not needed. Why can't we just say has executed without the underline in front, or driver without the underline, or statement without, like, there's no point in this underline whatsoever, unless in the statement interface counter iterator aggregate you have an has executed variable already and you don't want to overwrite that, or you know, have some problems with that. But where were we? Execute. Okay, so we set this to true so that we know that we have executed. Okay, and then return the actual execution, which is this statement execute of some parameters. Okay, let's write here. So here, okay, and here we are in class statement decorator. Okay. Something like this, so we know where we started. Okay, so now we need to check this statement. Well, this statement, which is this variable, is set here in the construct. Okay. And is this set any other place? No. Okay. So this statement is the statement that is passed on to the constructor. However, we have no way of figuring when this particular object of this class has been created, so that we can see what this is, if not null. Of course, this will not be null, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to call a function. This needs to be an object of a certain class. You know, okay, we have these comments here. Cake database statement interface put do a statement, but that doesn't mean much, because after all, this object statement could in turn be created in various ways past different parameters. So we would actually need to see where exactly is this this constructor being called. Okay, let's move down. Circle database connection. Okay. Database connection, line 333. Line 333, statement execute. Okay, public function run returns this get disconnect retry. Why are we trying to disconnect ourselves while running? What? Run, and of course a lambda, because would not have that in a different function. Great. So have class connection here and function 333. Have this. But that doesn't help us all that much, because after all, okay, we previously we were in this statement execute. So yeah, I really need to go to statement interface. We do a statement. Statement interface here. And search for we'll do a statement. Or maybe I'm just I'm not actually sent correctly. Take database. Yeah, no. The dual statement must be somewhere else, because this is just an interface with basically nothing useful, nothing valuable. Okay, where do I have Puduo statement? Let's see. Nope. In statement. So it's actually not cake database statement interface. It's or maybe this is returned by Puduo statement, but Puduo statement is in database statement. So class Puduo statements, yeah. Okay. So this statement execute. I'm going to take a wild guess that this is. Oh, how nice. No, we only have fetch all, fetch bind value, and the constructor here. Right, because Puduo statement extends statement decorator. So but we are coming from here. What the hell? Okay. So is this function execute actually here? This statement no, because we came from here. Okay, so see what I'm talking about. Like I think I'm already hungry by now, and I have to do some other things as well. So I think I'm gonna stop here. It's been almost 1.5 hours. I think it's very clear to see how awkward not using any kind of conventions is, because to be fair, it is in a way understandable that these guys did not use conventions, because conventions would not serve any purpose for them. Why? Because they don't actually use data in their stupid framework. They use classes over classes over classes over classes. So they don't actually, use integers, floats, strings, and so on, actual data that holds values with actual meaning. They have just created this spaghetti code of... I know I'm using the term spaghetti code a bit wrong, but to me, this is what spaghetti means. you have a code that sends you to another code because that returns an object of a class, and you see that there you also have to deal with objects of different classes, so you move on to them, which in turn deals with objects of different classes, which forces you to jump to them, and so on and so forth. Like and you have these weird situations where you have a function execute in a class that calls the function execute in a different class, but it's apparently very difficult to establish what that other class is, like, because pdo statement does not have function execute, and theoretically this underlying statement should be theoretically be a pdo statement object, but like it's no. This is what everything's wrong with modern programming, but especially with not orienting yourself towards data and having the ability to actually use variable naming conventions like systems Hungarian that actually make it easier for anyone to follow the flow of data, see where data is inputted, see where data is outputted, see and understand how data is transformed. And yeah, this is just garbage, and this is definitely not how I write my source code, because I wouldn't be able to be a computer programmer in the first place, because I wouldn't be able to actually finish any project if I would any significant project in a significant amount of time if I would create things this way. So yeah, anyhow, I am hungry, I need to go eat something. I hope you learned something useful from this very long video. I'm sorry that it couldn't have been shorter, but it is what it is. So now I will leave you. Have a nice day or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very much for watching. Please be sure to subscribe either to the YouTube channel or to my website. If you go to u5-lang.site, down you see follow my work on my blog, and also you can be notified when something appears. Here in the top right corner of the screen there's an RSS icon that lets you subscribe and get notified completely outside of any mass media platforms such as YouTube that might at some point perform some sort of censorship. So if you are interested in my project of building something better, building a better programming language, building useful things, then be sure to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and once again, have a nice day. I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.